So you want to learn boxing from the ground up, from beginner to advanced techniques? I'm Dan Woodgate from Shadowbox Media, and this is boxing. Right, so we know that the jab is the most important punch in boxing. The jab sets up absolutely everything, but what are you using that jab for? What is it being used to set up? The jab's being used to set up your power shots. And the first port of call when it comes to power shots is going to be that backhand. And that's what we're going to cover today. How to create a good backhand, how to ensure that you're getting as much power in that shot as possible, so when it lands, it does the damage that you want it to do. When it comes to creating a good backhand, there's a few things we need to take into consideration. Mass times velocity equals momentum, or what we know as power. So the amount of mass, or the weight that we can put behind a shot, times by the velocity or the speed that we get our fist to the target, that's going to create our momentum, or what we know as power. When it comes to creating a good backhand, it starts at the feet. We're going to take it top down, because what people see is the end result. So if we can get that right first, then as we go down the body, we can give you a better understanding of where the shot starts. So we're going to start at the finish and work backwards from that. So I'm going to get into my stance, and we're going to start looking at how we create power, or that momentum behind the shot. One thing I see with many people when they're throwing their backhand is they don't finish their backhand properly. They'll bring their shot through and they won't bring their shoulder through. And then they're wondering why they're not creating the power in that shot that they desire. The reason is because, again, if we go over that equation, mass times velocity, the mass isn't there. Unfortunate as it is, a fist isn't very heavy. So regardless of the amount of velocity that fist has got in it, it's not going to create a lot of momentum or power. So what we're looking at doing is adding mass to that shot. And we do that by lining the body up behind the shot. Very similar to what we've done with the jab. When we line our body up, we know there's mass behind that shot. With a backhand, we usually start with the jab. As you can see, my body mass is lined up behind that jab. We want to do exactly the same thing with our backhand. To do that, we need to be able to allow our hips to come through as much as possible. Otherwise, it's going to limit the amount we can take our shoulder through. If I stand too parallel to my target, my hips are not going to be able to go right through. So we want to ensure that as we throw our backhand, just like with our jab, when we line ourselves up behind the shot, the right hand is exactly the same. So we usually start with our jab, and as we turn the right hand through, we want to come to a very similar position. As you can see, my body is lined up behind the punch. Okay, so my body is lined up behind the punch to the point I can't even look around and see you. From there, we know that mass behind the shot, mass behind the shot. When it comes to the other aspect of the equation, which is the velocity or the speed, we need to ensure that our body is creating as much speed as possible in that shot. To be able to do that, there's a few things that we need to take into account down here. So if we come down to the hips and we have a look what the hips need to do, to be able to take shoulder through, okay, we need our hip to be able to come through as well. One thing I see with many people is the way they set their stance up limits the rotation of their hip. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that our feet are in a position to be able to allow our hip to come through. And as you can see, when I'm talking about our hip coming through, I'm not talking about turning my hip towards the target like I do with my shoulder. What I'm talking about is my hip allowing my shoulder to do that. If we go down to the feet, I'll give you a better understanding of what I mean. So what we see with a lot of people is that they take this L-shaped stance. And what I mean by that is that their heels will be pretty much lined up with no gap between their feet. We covered this when we went over the stance. There needs to be a gap between the feet to be able to create mobility in the hips. So in this position here, what I'm talking about when we're throwing that right hand, and what I do as an example, I'm going to push my shoulder for as much as I can without causing myself too much pain, is as I throw this through, I can actually feel in here that's pinching on the shot. So as you can see, from this position, I can't line my body up behind the shot, and I'm pushing that through as far as I can. And you see that my shoulders are not lined up behind the shot. So I'm not creating the mass that I want, which is going to give me the power in that shot. The reason being, where my feet are lined up like this, I've got no mobility in my hips. I haven't got the mobility in my hips to rotate through, okay? This here, so my groin is actually pinching the shot. I can feel as I push that through, if I took that any further, that's going to be quite painful. So in this section here, you can see that the middle section of the punch, if we're looking at feet being the bottom, hips being the middle, and then the final part of it being the top, the middle section of my punch is not being as effective as it can possibly be. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my foot, and that's going to allow me to bring my hip through. So from this stance here, if I turn my foot slightly, what you'll see straight away is that I can now line myself up behind the shot. So just this simple movement, as I turn my foot, that's allowing me to now line up my mass. I'm now able to create the mass that I want behind that shot. The next step is to ensure that I've got the balance to create that shot. In this position here, yes, my hip can come through and my shoulder can now drive through, but I don't feel very balanced. In fact, I'm a little bit wobbly as it is now. So going down to the feet, how we want to set them up is we want to get our foot turned not completely forward, but as forward as we can possibly feel comfortable with, where I can drive my hip through, and then that in turn will allow my shoulder to line up behind the shot, so I can create as much mass as possible. So what you can see there is this position is not very efficient. In fact, it's actually hindering our ability to create a shot. So we want to get our foot turned round, which then gives us the ability to drive that hip through, but we're off balance. So what we want to do is just line our feet up so we've got a nice gap between our legs. So now you can see my feet are in a position which gives me balance side to side, balance forward and backwards, and also allows me to drive that hip through and then turn that shoulder through the shot to create the mass behind the punch. So we've looked at feet positioning, we've looked at how important it is to allow our hip to drive through and how we create that mass behind the shot. When it comes to velocity, all we're talking about there is the speed that that shot comes out, and that all put together creates the momentum, or what we like to call power. And what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the bag and see how that looks. So now I'm lined up in front of the bag, or when we're in the ring, we're lined up in front of our opponent. We set ourselves up for the backhand with that jab. Okay, that's giving us our range. And then when we put all the aspects of the punch together, hopefully we create a nice, powerful punch. So I'm lining up, push my body through. As the shot lands, we're creating as much power as we can. Okay, so this is what it looks like when we put it into practice. So we jab, set that shot up. So that's what it looks like when you put every aspect that we've spoken about together, and that is what we call a backhand. To recap on what we've just been over, to create that perfect backhand, we need to ensure that we're lining up our mass, our body weight, behind the shot, so we can have as much effect as possible when that shot lands. To do that, we need to ensure that our hip is allowed to drive through. Our feet need to be in a position to give us balance both left and right, and forward and backwards, to ensure that we've got a stable base to create that perfect shot from. So that's the backhand. If you enjoyed that, make sure you click the like button and subscribe, because coming soon, we've got more videos. The next one's going to be lead hook, one of the most important shots in boxing. I'm Woodgate from Shadowbox Media, and this is boxing. Something like that? Perfect. Yeah, that's Select.